and welcome back. I need to say welcome back to pretty much everyone because I have been away for a while. This part 2 has been long awaited for, so I really hope that you haven't all deserted me and that you have come back to find out the rest of the Ammon's case. Now, this case, like I said in part 1, and I hope you have watched part 1. If you haven't, it's the video before this one. And it's literally just the start of the Ammon's case, introduces you to who they are and also how this all kicked off and how it all started. So like I said in part 1, this case falls into the kind of category that I've always thought about when I've watched like horror movies or, you know, kind of looked into previous cases that are similar to this. Are we dealing with a psychological issue? Are we dealing with a mental health issue here? Or are we dealing with something paranormal and supernatural? Is the person possessed, or are they having a psychological break? Is this individual developing psychosis for one reason or another? Now, like I said in the first part, it's very unusual that an entire family would develop a psychosis all at once. However, it's not unheard of. There have been cases where several people have developed psychosis at the same time. Mass hysteria is a thing and has occurred throughout the generations. So to say that one household developed it, especially children being influenced by parent, caregiver, it's not unusual. Also, as I mentioned in part 1, the grandmother, Rose, was very religious. So she was, you know, very kind of not strict, but very devout in her religion. And, you know, she was Christian and she made sure she read the Bible. And that was always something that was kind of discussed in the household. And as we know, you know, when children are growing up and they're hearing certain things, there are talks of demons sometimes, and there are talks of other entities. What people spoke about, though, was Latoya's change, the mother. And DCS asked to have her psychologically evaluated by, you know, a bona fide psychiatrist. And this was after the incident that I just spoke about with the young boy, where he did this weird backflip thing from the wall after literally climbing the wall. And not parkour style, like, you know, creepy possessed style, right? So they did ask to have her assessed, and she was actually given the all clear. You know, she was cleared by a psychiatrist who said that she did not have you know, psychological issues leading to them believing she would be a danger to the children or anything like that. However, the issues with the 12-year-old in particular persisted to a dangerous magnitude. He actually choked his younger brother with both hands, so around his neck, with such force that it took several adults to actually pry his hands off his young brother's throat. He was kind of described as having so much anger in his face and in his eyes that he was just determined to do this to his brother, which was frightening because A, it was completely out of character for him, and B, it's a frightening thing to witness. It's a frightening thing for anybody to go through, especially for his younger brother, who must have felt like, you know, he was going to die in that moment, no doubt. Quick correction. It was the 7-year-old boy that was doing it to his older brother, the 12-year-old. Sorry, got those two mixed up there. So it was the 7-year-old that was actually doing that to his older brother, which again is, you know, quite frightening. It's actually even more frightening thinking about it because his older brother was bigger than he was taller than he was. So for a 7-year-old to have that strength, where several adults have to pry him off, and over a 12-year-old boy who's, you know, hitting puberty, it is actually, you know, even more perturbing to think about. Even though they were physically as well by doctors given the all clear, the children and Latoya, there were no concerns like marks or bruises on them. There was, you know, because they were concerned as well, DCS, about physical abuse or neglect and things like that. They were ruling everything out. But there weren't any concerns there. Nothing had been reported there, but there were just reports of obviously the behaviours that were occurring. So they were brought aside in a separate room and the boys and the mother, and they were spoken to by Willie Lee Walker, who was the physician at the time, and he was starting to speak with the children about what was going on, asking them questions and for them to kind of explain their experiences. And again, the 7-year-old boy started to growl. His eyes rolled to the back of his head, and he started to speak in a very low, gravelly voice, and again turn his anger and attention towards his brother and say, "You will die. I will kill you. Do you want to die?" And of course, all in the room were very disturbed by this. This is like the third thing now that this young boy has done that has made them feel that there is absolutely more than a haunting, a possession going on here. And, initially they were ruling things as a history of believing in ghosts, a history of delusion, this is what they were talking about. But now physicians and doctors and, previously, and spoke about briefly in the first video, pastors are seeing this for their, for themselves. And it will go on. There will be other, professionals that will also witness these cases and will change their mind when it comes to how they thought about the paranormal and also the family and what they were going through. So whilst the examinations were still going on, one of the nurses that had witnessed the young boy, the 9-year-old, going up the wall, very much, it had obviously stuck with her. And she was convinced that this was something paranormal, as was Walker. In fact, he was somebody who previous to this incident did believe in the paranormal and demons. And the nurse, when she described him walking up the wall, to make it clear to the police, because the police, were kind of like, was he aided by his grandmother at the time because he was holding her hand? Did he do it in, like I mentioned, like a parkour kind of style? And she was adamant that no, that's not at all what happened. He glided up the wall backwards. Which, just thinking about it, actually gives me the creeps, like imagining a child kind of doing that and, with their eyes rolled back, holding on to their grandma's hand. And, obviously the grandma, Rosa was obviously very terrified at the time, and she grabbed her other grandson's hand when he got back down and just started holding him like this and praying over him, because, it was the only thing that she could think of to do. And another kind of medical professional in the case, Washington, he had also spoken to the police, and he said that he didn't know what to think of the matter, but that, what he had seen and also what his colleagues had been telling him was that this definitely wasn't just a mental illness. So he did believe that the children had a mental illness at play here. He did not think it was just paranormal, right? Well, I say just, but that's bad enough. But he also thought that there were mental illness at play here as well. So I'm going to get a direct quote from him, if you give me a moment. So we have here, so first we've got the fact that Washington did not want to respond to the Star, so that was the paper for requests for comment. But she had actually told the police that she was scared when it happened and ran from the room. She also stated that Walker, the other doctor, ran out of the room with me and that there was no way I was going back in. So this is obviously a second-hand quote, not a direct quote. But Washington did speak, Walker did speak to the Star and said, "We didn't know what was going on. That was crazy. I was like, everybody's got to go," which I can imagine that's what you'd say. And when he had spoken to the other doctor who didn't want to be named, who didn't really believe what was going on, he asked the young boy, the 9-year-old, to repeat what he had done when it came to walking up the wall. And Walker had said that he doubted the young boy could repeat what he had done because he said, unquote, "This kid was not himself when he did that." The boy, he said, according to the 9-year-old, said he didn't remember what happened and couldn't do it, according to the report. Walker, who said he previously did believe in demons and spirits, thought the boy's behaviour had some demonic spirit to it, but was also a result of mental illness. A police report quoted Washington saying, so when she spoke to the police, not the Star, but the police, that she believed there was an evil influence affecting the family. So, that is very interesting that you've got two medical professionals, one being a nurse, one being a physician, looking at their family and the antics, well, I say antics, scary antics that are going on here, and thinking this is not simply a mental illness matter that can be kind of managed in ways that they normally would, but this is also something demonic at play. Now, the thing that kind of comes in and reminds me, gets me thinking, the old noggin ticking away there, is when it comes to demonic possession and mental health, there has always been a link there. Now, the link, first and foremost, would be that back in the day, many, many moons ago, people believed that if anyone was displaying any behaviour that was considered out of societal norms at the time, they were mentally unwell. As we know, women in particular, and anyone with any form of disability, were thrown away in mental asylums at the time because they were considered a nuisance and disruptive of some kind to the family or society, or an embarrassment. So melancholia was one, which today you would probably call depression, extreme sadness. Women that would have what they didn't know at the time but was in today considered postnatal depression. Anybody with any form of severe physical or mental disability would have been. And at the times they'd be put in mental asylums, but prior to that, and still at that time, but in very religious communities, they would believe that these people had been afflicted because of sins that either their fathers or fathers' fathers had committed, that they had inherited in this life, or sins they had committed, or because they were considered weak. They were easy to possess. And that has been something that has actually followed into a lot of horror movies over the years. I watch a lot of horror movies, and lately I have been watching probably one a night. I've been on Reddit looking away, trying to find different horror movies that I haven't seen and kind of delving into genres I wouldn't normally watch. So as a result, I've been watching a lot more horror movies that have that religious kind of element to them that I hadn't seen before. And again, there's this theme of mixing in mental health and mental illness with possession and demonic entities. And a lot of films kind of leave you guessing, going, what are we dealing with here? A film that comes to mind almost straight away is Saint Maud, that I was actually having a conversation about yesterday. Saint Maud is a great one where you're there going, is she really experiencing this religious epiphany and magical experience, or has she developed schizophrenia? Has she developed some kind of psychosis and psychological break because of what she went through? And many people would say the latter. Some people would say could be either or. And it kind of leaves it up to your interpretation in many ways, which is always an interesting one. But yes, it is believed that like in Session 9, which is another movie that kind of plays with that theory, a quote from it is that the demonic entity at the end says, "I live in the weak and the wounded." And that's something that people have discussed, that it is easier for demons to possess somebody if they are struggling with mental health or some form of deep sadness that is kind of preventing them from functioning as they would with their lives before, which kind of makes sense on one hand and doesn't on the other. It's interesting to think that Nowadays, obviously, we go a lot more with the scientific route. But in this case, we have people who are based in science considering that it's both, not just one. Now, at the time, because Ammon's was, as that's the mother, Latoya, was considered to also be suffering from some form of mental illness, and this was not what the doctors had officially kind of given her, but this is what the police report had stated based on what they'd seen from the children. They thought that something had happened to them, that they were at risk in the home, and they did see the grandmother as a protective factor, but they actually removed the children from the home while this investigation was going. This was obviously very distressing for the family on many fronts, as I'm sure you can imagine and empathise with, because they kind of allowed them to go home and for one of the children to celebrate their birthday. I believe it was the 7-year-old was turning 8, and they allowed them to have, the party for him, and then they asked them to come back to the hospital, and they thought it was another review when really DCS was actually taking the children and removing them from the family, which of course Latoya, the mother, found very, very distressing, as did the grandmother. And in Latoya, when she spoke to the Star and she spoke to other kind of reporters about this, she said that she thought it was deeply unfair and deeply upsetting. Her children were crying and they didn't want to be separated. And she said that she felt they were beating it together, that things had improved and were getting better. And now that they're separating them, that things were going to get worse. And that was personally how she felt, not only, being distraught that her children were being taken out of her care. She also stated that they'd already been through so much and now they had to go through this trauma as well, which I have to agree with. What they've been through was witnessed by several individuals. Whether we're talking about a direct possession here or mental health challenges, either way, it's a lot to go through. It's very stressful. And now having your children removed from you is, I can't imagine how, traumatizing that is for everybody involved. So as a result, given that they, both Latoya and Rosa were deep in their faith and strong believers in the Christian church, they reached out to the chaplain for help. And this is where Reverend, and I don't know exactly how to pronounce this, but I think it's Maginot, it's Maginot, got involved. It's because the chaplain reached out to him and asked him if he could do an exorcism on one of the children. I believe it was the 9-year-old boy in particular. We're going to get some quotes quickly. So again, bear with me. So here we go. So Reverend Michael Maginot, so he, this was now on April 20th, 2012. So this has been going on for roughly about 5 months now, since the haunting started. And he was a priest, or a reverend, shall we say, from St. Stephen Martyr Parish in Merrillville. And he'd actually worked there for more than 10 years. So this is where he'd asked, through Ammon's, for an exorcism on the 9-year-old son. Maginot agreed to interview the family after Sunday Mass a few days later, so obviously he wanted to go to the house and get to know the family a little bit, see what was going on, which he did. And the first step he took was going into their house, sitting with them and asking them a few questions. He visited them on April 22nd on 2012 for 2 hours. He was there in total. And Ammon and Campbell detailed the phenomena for him. Then Campbell interrupted the interview to point out the bathroom light flickering. At this point, the Reverend went to investigate the situation and see exactly what was going on. And this is where he said that he definitely thought there was a demonic entity present, and that because the flickering stopped as soon as he walked up to it, that he told Campbell at the time that the entity must be scared of him. I don't know how true that. Oh, that just freaked me out. That shadow. I don't know how true that is, but that's what he thought at the time. So Campbell again interrupted the interview while they were having a conversation to talk about the Venetian blinds and how they were swaying back and forth, even though there was no windows open, no doors open, there was no breeze, but they seemed to be moving of their own accord. So again, the Reverend went over to investigate, and again they stopped when he got close. So that kind of reaffirmed his belief that there was a demonic entity there that felt threatened by his presence because he was a priest and a reverend. So he walked throughout the living room, and at that time, Latoya, the mother, was complaining of having a really bad headache and saying to her own mother, Campbell, that she was feeling this, pain like a migraine coming on, whilst the Reverend was walking around. So at that point, the Reverend actually put a crucifix against her head. And according to the Reverend and Latoya and Campbell, she began convulsing. And he stated that she was also possessed. This wasn't an exorcism that needed to happen just on the 9-year-old, but on Latoya also. And that the reason she's convulsing and having a headache at his presence and by the crucifix on her forehead is because she is possessed. He stated that not only are they being tormented by demons, but that he believes there are also ghosts in this house as well, and evil spirits at that. So he blessed the house before he left, praying and reading from the Bible and, kind of sprinkling and shaking holy water throughout the house and throughout each room. He told Ammon and Campbell's to leave and temporarily get out of there because it wasn't safe for them. And temporarily they did. They moved in with a relative to, for their own safety at the time. Now we have the interesting part where we have the police starting to believe what is happening here. So, after the incident with the Reverend, 2 weeks later, Campbell and Ammons move back into the property. And when they do, they have a visit from DCS who asks the Gary police officer to accompany her to the house to have this interview. Now, I don't know whether it was because she felt she needed them there for a professional reason, or whether she was maybe actually, quite scared of what was going on. Sorry, I've just seen a spider on my ring light. Okay, we're going to ignore that. We're not going to be a wimp about it. All right. So, anyway, asks them to attend, and 2 other police officers actually end up accompanying them out of professional curiosity. Whether it was actually professional curiosity or just plain curiosity, who knows? But they went along anyway to take part in this interview, and also, I believe, to see what was going on and observe the household. Now, Ammon's actually refused to step back into that house whilst they were conducting their little interview and examination, I guess, because she thought it would actually make things worse and she didn't want to be in there when they were doing that. But Campbell, the grandmother, actually agreed to accompany them into the house for the inspection. So in they went. We've got 3 police officers in total there, the lady from DCS and Campbell, the grandmother. What's interesting here, we have 2 counties police officers involved. So we have obviously the Gary Police Department, and he was actually the captain, and his name was Austin. And then we have the 2 that I mentioned that were there from Professional Curiosity. They were from Hammond Police Department. So as they went in and went round, Austin, when he spoke with the Star, he said that he believes in the supernatural, as in ghosts, but he doesn't believe in demons. Then he went on to say to the press and to the Star in particular, in this case, that after his visit to the property on Carolina Street, he changed his mind completely about what he thought about demonic entities. So his belief system was changed after what he experienced. What changed the captain, Austin's, mind seemed to be that not only while they were there were they having a lot of technological issues. So the batteries on their torches and their cameras and iPhones were beginning to drain very, very quickly, even though they had like full charge and full batteries, which is something that happens quite often. You see in investigations, whether they be, you know, ghosts or otherwise, paranormal, you see that it's said that these energies get drained from technological devices so that they can use it to communicate with us, or just to power them up themselves, so to speak. So he said that any photos that he was taking with his iPhone seemed to have these strange dark silhouettes in the photo. That hasn't been released to the public as far as I'm aware. I couldn't find them anyway. So then they also said that they all felt cold spots throughout the home as they did their investigation from room to room. On the way out, as he was leaving his radio from the police force, so that was issued to him, started to malfunction, so he couldn't communicate with the other officers, and it started to make these eerie noises. Recordings that they've done, so essentially it's kind of the equivalent to white noise recording. So they were interviewing Campbell, and when they listened back, when there were silent points, they heard somebody and a voice say, "Hey," like that to them, which really, you know, freaked them out and made them wonder what the hell was going on there. That spider's still there, by the way, just chilling rent-free. What was also interesting was that, direct quote from Austin here again. Austin said the driver's seat in his personal 2005 Infiniti, so this wasn't the police car that he had on the scene, this was his own when he returned home. The seat kept moving back and forward on its own. And when he had the car checked and taken to the dealership, the mechanic told him the motor on the driver's seat was actually broken. And the mechanic said that it could have actually caused a great distraction to him and potentially an accident. So this is something that really disturbed Austin, and one of the things that made him believe in the situation, and believe that this was demonic, because he thought it was directly trying to harm him because he'd been in that house. He said that he found himself definitely believing Ammon's claims, because initially he thought it may be a way for them to try and get money by selling their story. But then after what he'd experienced, he definitely thought that wasn't the case at all. But some of the mental health professionals, most of them, and DCS remained skeptical. The children were still not returned to Latoya in the family home at this point, and they were still carrying out checks. They weren't 100% on what was going on at all. So as we mentioned earlier, there was a lot of heavy Christian belief around and in the home, which happens in a lot of different households. However, what the mental health professionals and psychological professionals actually stated was that initially they felt that the whole talk of demons, you know, not the religion itself, but the whole talk of demons is what influenced Latoya. And therefore, from Latoya's experience, getting the influence from Campbell, her mother, then influenced her children. So again, let's get this direct quote, because I found this very interesting. So this is Wright, one of the mental health professionals, who says, "This appears to be an unfortunate and sad case of a child," this was the 8-year-old, "who has been induced into a delusional system perpetuated by his mother and potentially reinforced by other relatives." And this is what she wrote in the psychological evaluation. Clinical psychologist Joel Schwartz, who evaluated Ammon's daughter and older son, came to a similar conclusion about the other children. There also appears to be a need to assess the extent to which Ammon's daughter may have been unduly influenced by her mother's concerns that the family was being exposed to paranormal entities and demons. So there wasn't just one mental professional that felt that. There was, you know, 2 in this case that we know of. And these were psychologists as well, who evaluated the children over quite a long period of time. Which is interesting, you know, when you look at everything that's happened and what other people have said. Even though Ammon's daughter would tell Schwartz, the clinical psychologist, that she did, in fact, see shadowy figures, and that she most definitely saw doors slamming shut on their own. Wright, who interviewed and worked with the 8-year-old, said that his stories kept being very fragmented, changing, that he was asking random questions about going into space as well, and whether when you pass away you go into space. He seemed very confused about the whole situation, and didn't really have any straight answers to any questions, or a story or experience to tell. So it was only really the daughter out of the children, and obviously Latoya and Rosa, that were adamant that there was definitely something haunting or demonic going on here. So in fact, the daughter actually stated, "I know what I saw." This is what she said to Schwartz. "I know what I saw. I went into trances. Doors would slam and stuff, and started moving, and stuff started moving around." So Ammon's was also said to be very guarded every time she was interviewed by either clinical psychologists or DCS, that she felt that they weren't listening to them, they weren't taking it seriously, that this was demonic possession, this was paranormal, and that the Reverend felt this way, the police felt this way, when this was kind of like her backup as well for what she was saying that she had experienced, and that these mental health professionals weren't seeing, basically they weren't seeing what they didn't want to see, is the way that she was thinking about it. And she actually said that her children, all her children, her 3 kids, and she were 100% possessed by demons. So obviously DCS were concerned about this, and one of the goals that they set out was for Ammon's and the children to 100% not discuss demons or ghosts or anything to do with the supernatural, and to start taking responsibility for their behaviours and actions, which is very interesting. That they were not entertaining it whatsoever, and of course they wanted the children and Latoya to go into therapy longer term. It's interesting that the grandmother wasn't mentioned more throughout this. I know that she's not obviously responsible for the children in the way Latoya is, but she's obviously a big influence. So I found that quite interesting when looking at these different reports. Ammon's did kind of state that a lot of the reason why she wasn't getting employment was because of the demonic activity. Why the children couldn't go to school was because of the demonic activity. So this is why DCS felt that she really had to step up and take more responsibility for what was going on with her family and in her home. So Campbell, Ammons and Austin and the other 2 police officers, they initially went back on May 10th, 2012 to visit the property together, and this was after work hours. So it's interesting that the officers wanted to go back after that. Reverend Magnot went with them, and there were 2 Lake County officers now involved, as well as one of their dogs and the DCS family. So this was the case manager that was now actually assigned to the family. Her name was Samantha Illick, I believe that's pronounced. So she had the official capacity to be obviously involved with the family, and she wanted to be part of what was going on. And she actually went in the place of the first DCS manager who had taken on this case. So it's very interesting that the police dog was brought on, and I'm not sure what they were hoping to find. I know that when they pulled up some of the linoleum and the carpet, they found that underneath the flooring was a dirt base, and some of it kind of looked cracked as if it had been broken open. That's what was described, broken open. I don't really know what that means, but that's what they'd stated. So maybe he was thinking the dog was going to pick something up, but allegedly the dog didn't show any interest in any area of the house particularly. So this Magnot person has been referred to as Father, Priest and Reverend. I'm just going to keep referring to him as Reverend for a while here because they've changed it 100 times. But Magnot told police he wanted to check the dirt under the stairs for a pentagram. If you've seen my earlier videos, you know how I feel about them absolutely kind of automatically associating pentagrams with evil. I'm not going to go back into there. My previous videos do discuss it. And those of you that have been with me for a while, you'll 100% know what I'm talking about. But he thought that any personal objects could have been cursed and placed there or buried there, and that could be the answer for the demonic presence, or possibly. He also thought that that area could be an active portal, which is what was bringing shadow figures and ghosts into the home. It's very interesting that he was 100% kind of, excuse the pun, hell-bent that this was what was going on. So one of the police officers dug a 4-foot by 3-foot hole beneath the stairs, unearthing a pink press-on fingernail, a white pair of panties, a political shirt pin, a lid for a small cooking pan, socks with the bottoms cut off below the ankle, candy wrappers, a heavy metal object that looked like a weight for a drapery cord, and police records. That's so strange. So they raked over the dirt and obviously took those things away. Magnot blessed the area with salt, which he said is a barrier to evil. Now, this is interesting because that's also believed in witchcraft. So the fact that this priest did this, I found quite interesting, because I don't think it's usual for priests to use salt in their practice. I mean, people, you correct me if I'm wrong here, but it's definitely something used in witchcraft, regardless of your beliefs. So Illich said that later, standing in the living room with the rest of the group, when her left pinky finger started to tingle and whiten, she complained that it felt broken, which kind of freaked her out. Now, this is interesting. So less than 10 minutes later, Illich said she felt as if she was having a panic attack and couldn't breathe, so she went outside to wait for the rest of the group. Now, this is the lady from DCS, who's meant to be proving that there's no demonic entities here. The priest started questioning Ammon's inside the house, and she again complained of shoulder pain and a headache, a severe headache, and she went outside with Illich as well, because she said she wasn't comfortable in the house. Austin said that he left the house at nightfall, so that's the captain, who has been shot and has investigated many murders. This is what he said. Other situations and armed robberies over the 3 decades on the force, and he said he wasn't staying in that house past dark. So it's interesting how scared he was of the house. This is a captain of a police force for 30 years. This is what confuses me about this. But fear is contagious. We know that. So an exorcism was never actually authorized. And it hadn't been authorized for 21 years in that region to happen. Which is interesting in and of itself, and that the director of the diocese said that she can't comment on whether it was ever approved for confidentiality reasons, but it was carried out nonetheless. So Magnot's request to do a church-sanctioned exorcism, the bishop told Magnot to contact other priests who have performed exorcisms in the past to get advice from them, essentially. So he consulted them. Apparently he looked them up on the internet and he discussed things with them. He said he didn't do an exorcism, but he said he did an intense blessing. And reason being, I suppose, for him saying that is because he'd get in a hell of a lot of trouble for doing an exorcism if he wasn't authorized. So this is clearly the Catholic Church we're talking about here. So he did do that, and he went through with it. He called the entity they believed were involved an unclean spirits, an unclean demonic entity, and he felt that he was definitely fighting evil in this case to save the souls of this family. He was 100% convinced by this situation, and he wasn't swaying from that opinion for anybody, really. And he was determined to serve this family. Ammon's, however, was busy looking up possible names for the demonic entity to try and control the demon at the time. So in total, Reverend Magnot carried out 3 intense blessings, well, were essentially exorcisms, on Latoya and the home. Now, obviously, the children were still in care at this point, so he couldn't carry out anything on them. Obviously, it wouldn't be authorised by DCS anyway, whether he had authorisation or not. And these times, the police didn't actually accompany him, but he said his brothers were with him. And I don't know if that he means fellow priests or his actual brothers, because it's not specified in any of the articles that I read. But he says that thanks to Latoya finding a name that fit. And I found that interesting as well, because they'd had flies in the house at the beginning of all of this, which is what started everything off, that it must be, and this was the name that they got, quite a famous name, people have heard this quite a lot, I imagine, is Beelzebub, because he's known as Lord of the Flies, not the book now. And because of that she felt this is who they were dealing with, which just, makes me kind of lean a lot more with the mental health professionals on this one, because how can you just go online, see a name and go, yep, that sounds about right? But that's essentially what Latoya and a friend of hers did when they were on the internet looking up names. So that's what Magnot went with when he was doing the exorcisms, and that he said several prayers and gave intense blessings to Latoya. He claimed, and so did she, that she convulsed during this time, and that it was very difficult for her, and that he experienced pain, and she also said that she experienced intense bodily pain from head to her toes whilst this was going on. In between the second and third exorcism, the Reverend actually went on a spiritual retreat because he felt he had to kind of reboot himself and gain a bit of spiritual rest to tackle this 100%. So when he returned, he carried out the last exorcism on the home and Latoya to get rid of this entity, which he felt he had done once and for all. So stating here, Latoya says, I was hurting all over from the inside out. I'm trying to do my best and be strong. She said it was a different pain. It wasn't a natural pain, but felt as intense as giving birth. I'm not commenting. That's what she said. Eventually, Magnot said Ammons fell asleep, and she said that was the demon's way of lessening the ritual's effect. However, after the third exorcism, Latoya and her mother claim that everything demonic and haunting stopped. It ceased. That third exorcism did the trick, so to speak. By this time, Ammons and her mother had moved to Indianapolis, but they drove back for the exorcisms and court hearings because obviously the children were still in the care of DCS. But Ammons called while Magnot was on his retreat complaining of bad dreams. So the letter that she wrote was actually burned at the church bonfire. And Ammon said after that, the nightmares ended. Finally, after the third exorcism, which the priest said he did in Latin rather than English, which he felt made it more powerful, he was, determined that all had righted itself. And in November 2012, about 6 months after the children were taken out of Latoya's care, they were returned to her care, which she says they were all jumping for joy because not only had this demonic presence been eradicated from their lives, but that the children were back where they belonged. Charles Reed, who was actually the landlord of the home, said that he was worried this would scare new tenants who were going to move in there because, of course, the property had become of local interest and international interest at this point. And not just international, this case obviously, clearly has gone worldwide in terms of what they believe. Because at one stage, I think it was the Reverend that actually stated there were 200 demons in this house, and that's what this case is known as, the case of 200 demons in this home, because the Reverend was convinced there was a portal. Now, no more is mentioned about those items found under the floor, which I would find the most intriguing. That some of those items were weird. Where did they come from? not mentioned. That's what I would like to know more about, more than anything else, if I'm honest with you. But other than that, he said there were no problems in the home before LaToya moved in and with her family, and no problems after with any new tenants or his own experience. He said he'd been a landlord for 33 years and he thought he'd heard it all. This was a new one to me. My belief system has a hard time jumping over that bridge. So he said when he was told of the Catholic Church's involvement in this situation, however, it made him less sceptical. So, of course, that must be his belief system as well, or one that he has faith in, I imagine. DCS, so this was the manager, Christina, her name was Olenjanik, from the family case, said no demonic presence or spirits were in the home. And she dated that in her final notes, January 10th, 2013. So this was after the children were returned home. The family is no longer fixated solely on religion to explain or cope with the children's behavioural issues. For her part, Ammon said it was not the psychologist who resolved the problems, but God. And in her final word, when you hear something like this, she said, don't assume it's not real, because I've lived it. I know it's real. And that is the end of the Ammons haunting or possession, the house of 200 demons, as some call it. So we have it there. We're wrapping up there. This part was longer than I was actually planning on it being. I didn't kind of realize it was going to go on for this long. But it is interesting, this case, because, like I said, there were other professionals involved that were, their belief system and their kind of thoughts were shaken up on this. They weren't so quick to dismiss, like many others were. The people that had visited the home directly, including Samantha Illick, who was with DCS, actually felt very uncomfortable in the home and said she was feeling, physically like she was changing, having an anxiety attack and had to go outside. So I wonder if that was in any of her official reports. So what do you think? Do you think this is solely used to justify the behaviour of the children who maybe wasn't doing so great in school or at home, because she was keeping them at home a lot from school? Is this mental illness, or are we dealing with a combination of both of those and demonic entities? And what on earth were those things under the floor? Okay, we're going to leave it there, guys. Thank you so much for your time today and for joining me with these creepy, spooky stories. And guys and ghouls, I will see you next time, where we will be joined with more scary stories to keep you up at night and hopefully give you some nightmares. Please join me next time. Please like and subscribe and hit that notification bell so you can be informed of my next video. Thank you again, and I will see you next time. Bye.